Being Seen is a weekly podcast hosted by me, Darnell Moore, with new episodes dropping every Tuesday. These are Black stories. These are queer stories. These are gay stories. These are American stories, focused on the power of storytelling and culture to transform how we are seen and how we see ourselves. Being Seen is produced by Harley & Company and Darnell Moore and created in partnership with Vive Healthcare.
Good evening. I'm so pleased to welcome you to tonight's program, Being Seen, Art, Our Activism, and Archiving Our Existence, presented by Native Son in partnership with the Schomburg Center for Research in Black Culture. I am Bridget Catherine Pride, and I am the reference librarian for the Manuscripts, Archives, and Rare Books Division here at the Schomburg Center. The Schomburg Center for Research in Black Culture is celebrating 95 years as one of the world's leading cultural institutions devoted to the research, preservation, and exhibition of materials focused on global Black experiences. Our public archive boasts over 11 million items that illuminate the richness of Black history and culture. While we continue to navigate the quarantine imposed by COVID-19, we have migrated online where you can access parts of our archival collections and enjoy programs like tonight's. Please visit our website at schomburg.org for details. A large part of my work at the Schomburg is connecting our global community of researchers to archival materials that tell the stories of Black life from the perspective of our ancestors. One of the ways I do this is through the creation of research guides on specific topics. This past summer, I created the research guide Exploring Black LGBTQ Archives at the Schomburg Center. This guide highlights Black authors and journalists such as Joseph Bean, and performers and activists like Stormy DeLavrier, and others who identified as members of the LGBTQ community who have collections at the Schomburg Center and are open to be explored by our researchers. This guide serves as a launching pad for researchers who are excited to learn more about the lives of these individuals and how they engaged in activism. My colleagues and I in the Manuscripts, Archives, and Rare Books Division have been hard at work creating more research guides, including By Any Means Necessary, documenting Black protest at the Schomburg Center, a guide on film pioneer Oscar Michaud, and even a research guide on our founder, Arturo Schomburg. We are available to aid with research requests via email and video consultations. I hope to hear from you to learn more about your interests and to aid you in remote access to our collections. During tonight's conversation, we will be exploring the connection between art and activism when it comes to driving societal change, with a particular focus on storytelling narrative. Our panel will include Stephen Fullwood, Kimberly Drew, Mark Meacham, and moderator and organizer of tonight's program, Emil Wilbekin. Emil Wilbekin is the Chief Content Officer of Afropunk. He is also the founder of Native Son, a movement created to inspire and empower Black gay men. Just 2 weeks ago, the organization celebrated the 4th annual Native Son Awards in an evening celebrating Black, gay, and queer men. Emil, recipient of the Advocate Award at the 13th Annual Ad Color Awards, has served on the boards of the Stonewall Community Foundation, the Design Industry Fights AIDS, LifeBeat, the Black AIDS Institute, and Gay Men's Health Crisis. Please welcome to our virtual stage, Emil Wilbekin.
Hi, Bridget. Let's start again. Welcome to COVID, everybody. So thank you so much, Bridget, for that really gracious introduction and for all the work that you do and all the work that the Schomburg Center does for our community. Thank you so, so much. Well, welcome, everyone. And listen, it's a virtual world, and we are here tonight to really celebrate and talk about art, activism, and archiving our existence. Tonight's conversation is brought to you by Native Son and the Being Seen podcast, and it is in partnership with the Schomburg Center, and is also supported by ViiV Healthcare. I'm Emil Wolbekin, and I'm the founder of Native Son, and I'm also a creative advisor to the Being Seen podcast. Native Son was created to inspire, empower, and celebrate Black, gay, and queer men. And we also want to make sure that we harness our collective power. Native Son's pillars are wellness, which includes mental health, HIV and AIDS awareness and eradication, empowerment, which is professional development and mentorship, and amplification, which includes our voice and visibility, and also advocating for ourselves and having a seat at the table. Tonight's conversation and experience hits on two of those, HIV and AIDS, as well as voice and visibility. So we are grateful to the Schomburg Center for having us here tonight and for their continued partnership with Native Son. Being Seen was inspired by work that was done with ViiV Healthcare and Harley and Company. They enlisted the help of myself and Native Son for a project called As Much As I Can. As Much As I Can was created as a immersive theater production in the wake of a CDC announcement that the highest rates of HIV and AIDS infections in the United States for Black gay men were in Jackson, Mississippi, and Baltimore, Maryland. ViiV Healthcare, and particularly Mark Meacham, who I will introduce shortly, stepped up to the plate with a $10 million investment to address this issue. They felt like this problem needed to be addressed, what was going on in the community, and more importantly, to the people who are affected by the HIV and AIDS pandemic. This particular project, As Much As I Can, was designed to change behaviors, perceptions, and stigma that exist that is associated with HIV and AIDS. And through that project, we first saw that the power of storytelling has to change hearts and minds and how people perceive themselves and how we are perceived by others. When the pandemic hit, live performances were out of the question. As Much As I Can was about to go on tour. And so in our pivot, ViiV Healthcare decided to create a new platform. How could they touch people, inform people, and help people, and bring about more deep conversations and stories? And thus, the Being Seen podcast was born. Historically and currently, Black gay men and Black queer men are quieted, invisible, ignored in the media, and not fully recognized for their stories. We are left out of the conversation, and we need to change that. Being Seen was a way to respond to that. It was produced and hosted by Darnell L. Moore, but it also created a unique partnership with visual artists. Giancarlo Valentin and Texas Isaiah, along with 10 other artists, Dietrich Brackens, Kara Walker, Diana Ijati, Olivia Fields, Detour, Ronald Jackson were all brought on to contribute their works to support the audio and storytelling that was created. Their artwork is profound, and they were more than happy to contribute to be included in this visual representation of the podcast, and we are grateful for their contributions. We have many hopes for this project in creating an archive of incredible talent of Black, queer, and gay men, but also our allies and other people who support our stories and also contribute to our community and have stories of their own. This really has been a love letter to the Black, gay, and queer community to show that we exist, that we are powerful, that we are human, and that we can defy gravity as we move forward to create a Black future. We are also grateful for our creative partnerships. I'm a creative advisor on this, as well as Deshaun Usher, and Moby, mobilizing our Brothers Initiative, and Native Son served as promotional partners. So without further ado, I would like to introduce to you and welcome Mark Meacham, who is the head of External Affairs of North America of ViiV Healthcare.
Hi, Emil. How are you doing?
I'm great, Mark. How are you?
I'm fantastic. And I'm always so delighted to be at the Schomburg, even virtually. When I think about the repository of our experiences as individuals and as a people, it always feels like coming home. And so I actually daily look at the Schomburg postings on Instagram as part of my daily ritual.
Oh, thank you. Well, thank you, Mark, for your support, and thank you for joining us tonight.
Well, thank you. And you know, when I was listening to your introduction, Emil, I was thinking about the line where we started with this work, and really it's about elevating the voices of our community. ViiV Healthcare is 100% focused on HIV, and we're working to end the epidemic. You can't do that without addressing the disparities that focus where Black people bear the brunt of HIV. And I believe firmly that we can't do that without involving people in their own solutions. So about 5 or 6 years ago, we were down in Jackson, Mississippi, as you said, and in Baltimore, Maryland, talking to everyday people affected, Black and gay men, gay and queer men affected by HIV, about their lives. And those stories formed a co-creation process where we had the creatives, but we also had the community, and their voices are part of that creative process. I think the other thing about the work is the firm belief that culture can be more than entertainment. It can be a way to engage people, quite frankly, that you can't do with your general public service campaigns. You can get people to think about issues that they might not be able to talk about even in their own communities. So you have people who will be in a community, people who have known each other for their whole lives, and they won't openly talk about HIV. But we found that by going to a play like As Much As I Can, an immersive theater experience about their stories, and I think by listening to the podcast Being Seen, they can see themselves and can reflect on their experiences and can engage with them in a more direct and different way. And I guess the last thing I'd say is that our overarching goal in supporting culture as a means to drive change in people's lives on a daily basis is the belief that Black people can live more, who are affected by HIV can live more abundantly, they can live fully with HIV, and that we can reduce the burden in our community. Emil, you may be on mute.
I am doing this tonight. I don't know what. Yeah. So I want to say thank you, Mark, for your remarks. And thank you so much for what you and ViiV Healthcare are doing for the community. It is powerful. And I love that you are using art in the activism and visual arts, photography and performing arts, and creating change to shift minds, and hearts around HIV and AIDS for people who are living with the virus, but also for the community at large and how they perceive us. So thank you.
Thank you, Emil.
So thank you again for joining us tonight. Our panel discussion is Art, Activism, and Archiving Our Existence. I failed to mention in my opening remarks that I am HIV positive. And so it is very important to me that we have these conversations. It is very important to me as a Black gay man that we know our past so that we can move forward. Tonight, we will have a conversation exploring the connection between art activism when it comes to driving societal change, and particular focus on storytelling and narratives. What's interesting is that we will be bringing in the visual arts into this conversation. The discussions will move from the past, touching on powerful historical moments, and moving through the future. This will include a focus on ways of narrative art and activism and how they have historically been used in the fight against HIV and AIDS. We also want to encourage people to make sure that they are archiving their own lives. You're seeing visuals on the screen from the Schomburg's archives. And this is the third event that we have done at the Schomburg with ViiV Healthcare. And they've all been very, very powerful. So I'm so grateful to Novella Ford and Kalila Banks for their support. And also the fact that the Schomburg, which is an iconic representation of Black American culture, centered in Harlem, Langston Hughes' ashes are buried in the Schomburg Center, and that they have such a rich and beautiful archive. I'm also so grateful for our panelists tonight. First, we have Stephen G. Fullwood, who is an independent archivist, editor, and writer. He is the former associate editor of Manuscripts, Archives, and Rare Books divisions at the Schomburg Center for Research in Black Culture. In 1998, Fullwood founded the In the Life Archive to aid in the preservation and materials produced by LGBTQ people of African descent, also housed at the Schomburg Center. With archivist Miranda Mims, he co-founded the Nomadic Archivist Project, an initiative that partners with organizations, institutions, and individuals to establish, preserve, and enhance collections that explore the African diasporic experience. Fullwood's published works include Black Gay Genius, co-edited with Charles Stevens from the Counter Narrative Project, and To Be Left with the Body, co-edited with Cheryl Clark, and Carry the World, a bibliography of Black LGBTQ books, co-edited with Lisa C. Moore. Welcome, Stephen. You're on mute. I know, it's the thing tonight.
Apparently, thank you very much for inviting me. And I'm happy to be here. I'm happy to have a platform to talk about the In the Life Archive. I want to give you a sense of how it started and what some of the things that it contains, if that's okay. Yeah. And so I want to begin by saying, once again, thank you very much for inviting me. I'm so enchanted by the idea of what Native Son is doing, as well as what ViiV is doing. And I've loved what Kimberly Drew I'm sorry, I can't think of Jenna is doing right now with with Black Futures, because that's all the work that I do. I'm interested in the Black future. I'm interested in the Black past, and the work that I did at the Schomburg for 19 years, 3 months, 24 days, was to aid in the preservation of Black global culture. So it's not simply just Black American culture, but everywhere in the world where Black people have been, we have materials about them. And so to talk about the In the Life Archive, it was founded in 1999. And I actually started at the Schomburg a year before that. And so when I came to my curator at the time, Dinah LeChatinier, to ask her whether or not we could build this archive, she said that was fine. And Schomburg had already had a history of collecting Black queer stuff. So they had the papers of Joseph Beam, who was the editor of the In the Life archive, the In the Life anthology in 1986. What we have here on the screen are a few images from the archive, and unfortunately I couldn't get any images right now because of COVID, so I couldn't go to the Schomburg to take photographs. I took some pictures of some things I own in my house, and some of the things I'm going to mention today. We've kind of gone through those images quickly, so we'll go back through them later on, I guess.
Yeah, we'll come back. What I want to thank you for your introduction, and thank you for all the work that you've done, because it's so important. And then I'm going to bring Kimberly in now. So our next panelist is Kimberly Drew. Hey.
Hello. Am I muted? Am I making noise?
You are unmuted because you're a Black woman and you came in.
It's really Yvonne was like, unmute, child. I'm so excited to be with you both. I'm just like overwhelmed because I respect and revere both of your work so much. So I'm just jazzed to be here.
Oh, well, I love it. So I am going to give you your formal introduction because it's the Schomburg and this is what we do. So Kimberly Drew is a writer, curator, and activist who received her BA in art history and African American studies from Smith College. She first experienced the art world as an intern in the director's office at the Studio Museum in Harlem, which inspired her to start the Tumblr blog, Black Contemporary Art, and sparked her career in social media and the arts. Since then, Drew's writing has appeared in Vogue, Glamour, W, Teen Vogue, and Lenny Letter, and she has executed Instagram takeovers for Prada, the White House, and Instagram. Drew recently left her role as social media manager at the Met and has just recently released her book, which was co-authored with Jenna Wortham, called Black Futures. And so we are delighted to have both of you here because you all are actually doing the work to really preserve how we will be seen now, but also in the future. So I want to start with Stephen. You were telling us about In the Life archive. And so how did it start? Like, how did the actual archive come to life?
The archive came to life by being at the Schomburg Center. So I was in the right place at the right time with the right people who, again, as I mentioned briefly, the Schomburg Center had already been collecting Black queer stuff since its founding. So folks who we think of as queer in some way or homosexual or gay, Langston Hughes, Connie Cullen, Wallace Thurman, they were collecting those materials, those books at the time. Later on in the 80s, they were collecting other kinds of materials, such as the records of other countries, Joseph Beam, Asado Saint, Melvin Dixon. And so these men and some women, their works were being collected. They were hosting readings by Samuel Delaney, Octavia Butler. So they were very active in that way. And so I happened to be in the right place at the right time to begin an archive that focused exclusively on people of African descent who were LGBTQ and any other name we come up with in the future. The archive is large enough to hold it.
So Kimberly, when you started the Tumblr blog, what was your inspiration? Like, what was your impetus to do that?
I mean, it's perfect to say after Stephen, it was really because I was at the Studio Museum. I was in my sophomore year of college and knew nothing about nothing. And my first week in the office, learned about Basquiat, learned about Glenn Lydon, learned about Lorna Simpson. And after, I think, 10 weeks of being at the institution, I went back to my college campus and was like, I'm not learning about these same artists anymore. How can I build an infrastructure to continue my own learning, but also really to like take that baton that I'd been passed working in Thelma's office and making sure that the artists that I did remember, that I didn't forget those names. And being a millennial, I felt like it had to be done in an online format.
So that's a perfect segue. I mean, I think about social media now. It's like everyone is literally archiving their existence on a daily basis, right? Why is it important that it's particularly right now, right? With the racial equity protests, with racial justice issues, why is it important that we are showing ourselves and telling our stories as Black queer folk. And Kimberly can jump in, and then we'll go to Stephen.
Sure. I was going to say, I would love to hear what Stephen says. I mean, I think it's really quite a difficult question to answer because there's so much that's happening online that is like nearly impossible to collectively archive. There have been multiple projects that have sparked up. There's the Internet Archive, there's Web Recorder, there's incredible work that digital archivists have been doing to make sure that the things that are shared or happening online, because there's so many things that are like uniquely online, are restored for future generations. So that's one thing. But I think on the other side of it, I think it's so incredibly important for us to revel in ourselves. Like I think about the power, and I know that people are like, oh, selfies are so vain, but I think about the power of representation. I think about the power of someone saying, I love my Black, queer, insert, all these lists of identities, bodies, and sharing it online unabashedly and unapologetically, and how valuable that is. I think for so many of us growing up as especially queer folks, you're just constantly looking in every nook and cranny for something that looks like you or sounds like you or feels like you. It's like why, so many of us love like the Golden Girls or whatever. Like we're all pining for some sense of reflection. And I think that in this age, especially with social media, we just have more instances and opportunity to connect on a truly global level.
I love that. Stephen.
No, I'm glad Kimberly went first because we were looking for y'all. My generation was looking for y'all. Generation X was looking for y'all. We were trying to prepare for you guys. And we lost people due to AIDS and HIV, as well as through cancers and other kinds of things, and violence. So we had this whole generation of people from the mid 80s to the 90s who were there to call you guys and to call us into action. And so we've been searching for you guys, and we're so happy that we have this internet community now that people can actually see, reflect, and imagine themselves in ways that our generation really couldn't. I turn 55 next month, and I love what you said about loving my Black queer body. I was like, that was unheard of. Growing up, I grew up in Ohio. By the time I got to New York City had it on lock. And it was still a struggle to be visible. And there are so many people that we have in the archive that were determined to be visible even as they were dying. And so I think it's important for the person to acknowledge that he, she, they, however you define yourself, that you have a story that matters. You don't have to be famous. I love that people talk about themselves and archive themselves online. And you can download some of that information. So you can actually own it for yourself. It's not going to simply disappear or go to the Internet Archive, as you mentioned earlier. So I'll get into a little bit more about the things I think one should be doing to archive themselves.
So one of the things that was so interesting when I started Native Son 4 years ago was I started doing photo research. Mm-hmm. And it was kind of horrifying for me that it was so challenging to find images of people that I thought, it would be very easy to find those images because they're well known. They, had written books. They had appeared in movies, but there really isn't a lot of that old material. How was it for you, Stephen, to gather those images and materials? What did you have to do? Like, did you reach out to people's families? Like, how did you find those materials?
I definitely repeat, I was in the right place at the right time, not just at the institution, but I was working in the community. So I knew a lot of the players, folks who had been doing activism for 30, 40 years, who were getting up in age. And so just reaching out to them and saying, and this is at the sort of the burgeoning internet, I was able to connect with a lot of people that way. And it was easy. It was so easy because people wanted, and they were affirmed by the idea that an institution like the Schomburg wanted to have their materials. So I had a pretty easy job. It was about helping to facilitate those things, to find those materials, to encourage people that, yes, you've done this history and that we're looking for you. And so that material came fairly quickly over those 18 years. Yeah, 18 years.
So I just want to play a clip from the Being Seen podcast, just to give people a taste of some of the conversations that we had.
Mm-hmm.
Systems of oppression, prisons, education, healthcare, HIV stigma, entertainment. How have the biases of the American entertainment industry shaped us? Where do we find the power to change it? Wesley Morris.
But you had essentially for about 70 years, 80 years, white people defining what Black people were to American audiences, uncontested by other Black people, by actual Black people. You know, that's a powerful thing. They had 80 years to define what and who we were. And those definitions, there was nothing to love in those definitions. And they got there first. They were foundational. They created every stereotype of a Black person that we have today came out of the blackface minstrel period, starting in the 1830s and continuing to this day, essentially. But that's, 7 or 8 decades of just constant live entertainment built around and focused on the worst possible ideas of Black people. And not only that, but that, we should remain enslaved because it's better for the country, better for us, and the enslaved people liked being enslaved. It was their preference. So, you just have this mechanism that is sort of designed to create an impression of who Black people were that's still with us, that we are still fighting against in these small psychic ways, in these large, somewhat legislative ways. We are still trying to keep laws from being repealed and to get things reinforced on the books.
So when I listen to Wesley and what he's saying, and I think about archiving, I think about what happened in 2020 with the protest and with people showing up and being tired of being boxed in and marginalized and erased. And Kimberly, I saw you out there on the front lines actually marching and capturing images. And then Stephen, connected to you, I think about the AIDS crisis, right? And a lot of protesting. Kimberly, let's start with you. Why are we still fighting to be seen?
Why? I think it's an open question for anyone who's encountering this beautiful conversation. Why are we still in this time where we have to keep doing this marching and doing this movement? I was out at the Stonewall actually during what was, a different type of pride this year. And I had this like bone chilling moment when I was chanting "Hands up, don't shoot," because I'm like, I've been chanting this for 4 years and I just don't want to be chanting this anymore. And I think to relate back to the conversation of archiving and to relate to that conversation of what it means to find and source these images, I think it's important also to talk about the vulnerability that goes into being seen in those ways. I think it's so important to make sure that you have consent from both the people who are being imaged and the people who are in community with the person being imaged, yes. Because that is a tender exchange. And I think we would be remiss not to note that, especially when thinking about archiving those who are lost to so many different things, whether that be state-sanctioned violence, health crises, or what have you. We have to make sure that we're doing this really essential work of holding each other. And that happens digitally, and it happens in the text, in the source materials, but it also happens on a really human-to-human kind of connection, because I think that it's the denying of our humanity, the denial of our humanity that finds us asking these questions. Why do we have to fight so hard still?
Mm-hmm. And Stephen, what about you? Archiving materials from the AIDS crisis,
Mm-hmm.
At the end of the civil rights movement and all of this, why do we have to keep fighting so hard? Why can't we be seen?
Well, the thing is, I'm not sure if it's why are we still fighting so hard to be seen when I think about the long view. The long view is this: we've been enslaved a lot longer in this country than we've been quote unquote free. That's the first thing. We still have a lot of laws that prevent us from living full lives, right? So I think about that. And I think about when it comes to the 80s and 90s in terms of archiving these narratives, these papers and things, I think of Joseph Beam for one. And sure, Joseph Beam published In the Life, which was the first Black gay anthology in 1986. He died 2 years later. Now, when everybody told his mama to throw all that stuff away, she didn't. In fact, what she ended up doing was helping Essex Hemphill finish the book, which became Brother to Brother, New Black Gay Voices. And this was really a critical moment where she not only helped finish the book, she donated her son's papers to the Schomburg after being told, you should throw that stuff away. So I think there are all these different stories that that different generations have yet to discover in the archives, at the Schomburg, at the Lesbian Her Story archives, at the One archives, different archives around the country. We are connected in the sense that the papers and the things that are, but sometimes we're loath to really do the work that we need to do to be connected. We think it should be easy. It should be online. It should come to us easy. Our responsibility is to connect to each other in meaningful ways. And archiving that stuff largely, in some cases, because you died, people generally throw your stuff out. They're not thinking of an archive. We're not in that time anymore. So there's a lot more archival education about people preserving their stories through their papers or through their digital assets. These are really important moments. And I'm watching the change from the Antique Roadshow sort of, look, I got this, how much is this? And sort of that morphing more into, you're part of a larger conversation. And you've always been a large part of a larger conversation that's been happening for quite some time. And so, absolutely, Kimberly, come on.
Oh, no, I was just going to say, I think what you said is so brilliant. And in my mind, I was just thinking about, the second part of that question is, why do we have to fight so hard to be seen? And I think that it's important to also just underscore that it is important for us to see ourselves. Absolutely. I think we always have to think about a matter of vantage point and how we're centering ourselves. And it's the work of Joseph Beam that saw everyone, that built that archive. It wasn't that it was just this institutional force. It was this person on the ground in community, lovers, friends, people you absolutely hate, but who are built in your archive. That is such an essential part of it. And I think gets lost, especially when you think about the ways in which marginalized people are told our lives don't matter. It's like, no, we matter to each other. We're codependent on each other. And that is beautiful.
No, it's absolutely. Thank you for bringing up who sees who and why. Right. And so one of the reasons why I agreed to do this talk is because I wanted to bring it home that your story matters. It should matter to you. And then secondly, to the communities in which you're in. And so knowing that your story matters and start to think more about how the information is coming to you, either through the internet or whatever, through other people, think about the points of reference. I heard a lot when you started out by saying, we're being erased or we're not having our voices there. And I was thinking, really, it kind of depends on where you are in this country. It depends on what community you are. There are communities of people that feel visible because they see themselves and other people see them. And they write books and they do plays and they do all kinds of things. Right. So I like to mention that it's a very complicated experience right now to look at how Black LGBTQ life is viewed in this country when you have a Laverne Cox on TV, and then you have all these trans men and trans women being killed.
Right.
So visibility doesn't necessarily mean the end of the violence against us. Right. But we continue to push, and that's our responsibility. So,
I mean, that's one of the reasons why I started Native Son was how do I create a platform where Black, gay, and queer men could see each other and see possibilities, right? So they can also know their history, know who came before them, but they could see who is doing things right now. And I mentioned during the Native Son Awards 2 weeks ago, this has been kind of an unprecedented year for Black, gay, and queer men, that you have 2 Black gay men winning Pulitzer Prizes, that you have Rashad Robinson leading Color of Change while Alphonso David is leading the Human Rights Campaign, and so forth and so on. Mm-hmm. It's still kind of troubling to me that a lot of the older references are very hard to find, and just continuing that storytelling. So how are we now, right in this moment, preparing for future generations, which leads me to Kimberly. Mm-hmm. Tell us more about Black Futures, the book that you and Jenna put together.
Yeah, absolutely. With joy. So for the last 5 years, Jenna and I have been working. Jenna, who's actually a co-podcaster with Wesley, who had that really beautiful segment from the Being Seen podcast. Jenna and I came together in the interest of making a book that could start to tell a story of what it means to be Black and alive right now. with a special look at social media, understanding that so many of the connections that are happening online, the ways that our community feels like it's coming together, and then of course being torn apart or being invisibilized, erased, or attacked. How can we create a volume through multimedia that just wraps its arms around many of these concepts? And what became of the book is this really beautiful 500-page book that has Black folks from all over the world, from like classrooms in Finland to dance floors in Johannesburg. There's like pictures of people booty popping. There's really beautiful essays in the text, really enriching conversations. But we wanted to make something that could sit in the Schomburg and on your mom's like coffee table. Really interested in revering and celebrating Black life. And then also within the book, we included several recipes for people to think about building their own archives, whether that's starting their own art collection or how to be with yourself naked, this beautiful essay from Adrienne Marie Brown. So there's like a whole host of different tools and then also just resources.
So I think this is a perfect time to shift the conversation into, because we have a lot of questions in our stream about people like, well, how do I create my own archive? And then where should I donate my archive? So in episode 6, Texas Isaiah, the photographer and visual artist, talks about expanding and building one's personal archive. And in episode 11, they did this really interesting concept with Darnell and Lena Waithe, where they intercut excerpts from Soul with Ellis Hazlip, with the wonderful conversation with James Baldwin and Nikki Giovanni. So how can people start their own archive, and what should they be thinking about, and how should they do it?
So people have already started their archives. That's the first thing. They have the phones, they have the computers, they have a digital archive, things that are born digital, they have things that they've saved. Now it's just sort of really thinking about what you want to include in your archive. I like to tell people that I've been to the future, because I have been to the future, and that I know people are looking for you. So what are you going to leave behind for them to think about, how you lived, what you loved, your interest, whether or not you're a performer, activist, or there's a sort of a genealogical relationship that we have to our communities that is not simply biological, it's how we live. That's what I love about Black Futures, because I feel like, wow, this is an amazing book. It's so generative. It's so full of vitamins and beauty. Thank you. Just thank you, Kimberly. Thank you. But I think one of the things you can start to do is to surface why you want to have an archive. Why do you want to do it? Do you simply want to do it to tell your story? That's enough. Where is this archive? Analog, digital. Where's the material at? I'm sure that I know that I'm always in conversations about different kinds of archival collections with performers and artists and theater owners and stuff like that. And I just go, let's be basic about it. Let's be journalistic. Who, what, where, when, and why, and how. Let's try to figure these questions out. And it's very basic. If everyone today that's listening to this particular event just went and thought about, if today you died, what would someone know about you? What evidence do you have in your house? Is your computer locked? Is your phone locked? What kinds of things have you left on social media for people to find? What kinds of things have you published over the years, or performances that were captured, say, by the Schomburg Center on their public programming? Think about those things. And then also think about spending time building that archive. And sometimes people immediately go, oh, yet another thing to do. I'm like, well, no, you can do it iteratively. Just do it in iterations. Think about what you have, why you want to have an archive. Think about what you have and begin to assemble these things. I do this thing called Archive Sunday, where I basically every Sunday I'm either doing genealogy, or I'm building on our personal family archive, or I'm building on my own personal, professional and personal archive. I just spend a little time on Sundays doing that, so that it's not an overwhelming process. It's something that can help you think about why you do what you do. You benefit in ways that you can't imagine by keeping your own story, and then thinking about over the years how you've developed over the years. And so social media can do that to some degree, but there's nothing like a more active way of doing it, a proactive way of doing it. And so, Kimberly, what you got to say? I know you got something.
I'm just taking mental notes. I'm like, okay, next Sunday, you see me in the archive.
I got you.
I think the only thing that I would add is that it's essential that you take the reins on how you want that to exist. I think that we have to I think a lot about neurotypicality. I think a lot about tactility. I think a lot about accessibility. And who do you want to access your archive and how is my favorite part of what you were talking about, because it doesn't have to be this very glossy photo that ends up in an institution. Cookbooks can be archived. What sensory things do you want to leave in? What ways do you want to make it so that there's as many entry points as possible on your own terms? That's the beauty of building your archive, because you don't have to meet all the stipulations of what an institution wants. Right. And I think that the more that we can think about that and expand that, we retain a bit more agency. If a call comes, and if a call doesn't come, remember yourself, remember your friends, remember this, remember that. I've had so many battles with my family in particular where I'm like, I want to do an oral history project. And they're like, get out of here. Right. They're like, no, I want to know. I want to know where you guys were during the North riots. Like, even if it was something that maybe you're not super proud of, like, I want to know so that I can pass it on to the next generation of our family, because it is so important. And I think that being able to define that importance is key.
Absolutely. Absolutely. One thing I'd add to what you're saying that I really want to emphasize is that it's your story, and that agency is critical. And so even if your materials, if you're considering going to an institution, you still have, you're an agent of your own story. And you can speak with an archivist or a curator about the kinds of things you would like to donate or sell to a library. And they'll tell you, this is what we collect, this is what we're interested in. And as the more you build your archive, and the more you know what you have in your archive, the better the relationship can happen. And this is what some of the things we do with the Nomadic Archivist Project. We work with people to help facilitate those relationships with institutions so that it's this kind of relationship. It's never this, it's always this. And that's one of the reasons why I love working with the Nomadic Archivist, because I can go anywhere in the world and work with folks in their archives, whether they want to keep them or work with an institution. So
one of the things that was very interesting with the Being Seen podcast is that they collaborated with photographers to create different images that aligned with some of the topics. And so I just want to take a second to show some of the work that was curated, because it is spectacular. And so we have photographs. Again, they partner with Giancarlo Valentin, and they also with Texas Isaiah. This is Texas's image. But they also work with other photographers like Clifford Prince King, Elliot Jerome Brown Jr. I'm letting them go through. Ja Gray, Kennedy Carter, Nate Palmer, and Shane Wallace. And I love these images because they're so us. They're so Black. They're so free. And I think sometimes, to your point, I think, Kimberly, you mentioned, like, it doesn't have to be this pristine, portrait, right? That's taken. One of my favorite pictures of myself as a child is we're in a Cadillac, and my brother's leaning out the front window, and I am in the back, and my mother's holding me, and I'm doing the presidential wave. I was like, well, that would be me. Yeah. Even as me, I was still doing that stuff. So people on a tactical level, things don't have to be like perfect and in a Ziploc bag and stuff like that, correct?
Well,
I was about to say, I feel like Stephen might have
get the tissue paper and the white glove.
So it's between those 2 points, Emil. It's not that everything needs to be pristine, and it's not that you should have this stuff somewhere where you get floods in the winter. You want to take care and put the stuff away, and you can keep it flat in terms of photography and other things and photos that don't have to be acid free. But you want to make sure anywhere you wouldn't want to go in your house or your apartment, don't put your archive there. If it's endangered in any kind of way, whether it's heat or water or what have you, you want to be really mindful of that. And so, again, there is so much online that can help you just get started. It's all about just finding that information, keeping things clean so that they're not impacted by other things in the closet. Knowing where the stuff is critical, because you want to put your hands on it. You want to be able to show people. And so without taking too much out of here, I just want to say, just get started on it, and then begin to reach out to people, archivists, other folks, myself. We can help you just navigate what that looks like.
So
I wanted to just say one of my favorite things, sorry.
Yeah. No.
Not important, but I just want to say it just because it's fun. One of my favorite things in the One Archive is this booklet that they have that's just matchbooks from different motorcycling, like queer bars that no longer exist up and down the California coast. So it can be so many different things.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I love that. Someone in the comments said, so sorry, I'm over here reading, but it says, I always think of Toni Morrison when she talks about invisible to whom.
Yes, absolutely.
There we go. Snap, snap, snap. So someone asks a question for Stephen. When does duplication become too much in archiving?
That's a great question. So recently I was working with an institution where I advised them to keep 2 copies of everything. And one was for the archive, one that would be, donated, but also one for the office. Mm-hmm. They had so many different kinds of programs, and I could see them in the future going, someone asking them, like someone doing an exhibition at a museum, do you have a copy of this program? And rather than going back and forth to their storage or to the library, they'll have it on hand. Mm-hmm. I think you shouldn't keep any more than maybe 3 things, and you should try to keep the best copy of those things. Unless that one of those materials has it has notes and other things you want to that's a really important archival document. It kind of tells you where you were, what you were thinking, or what someone else was thinking. So you want to keep things that have a unique character to them. But you don't want to go crazy with duplicates of anything, because they would drive you crazy. You'll be thinking, oh, I know one day I'm going to donate this somewhere. It's never going to happen. It's never going to happen.
People always think I'm crazy because I'll go to, say, Slave Play or some other event, and I always take 2 programs, and it's for that reason, because I already know me, like I'm going to be pouring over it later. Like, well, for the archive though.
Yes.
So we have a couple of other questions. How can I donate potential archive materials to the New York Public Library and the Schomburg during this COVID-19?
Well, I left the Schomburg in 2017, but I've maintained a relationship with the library. And I know that right now, a lot of libraries and archives are not collecting things because of the pandemic. Right. But what you can do is you can reach out to the appropriate curator at the Schomburg, which is usually is based on format, and speak with him or her about their policies. And you can begin to have that conversation now. So at the very least, you can know what the steps are before, and then when they start to collect things again, you can donate them.
So someone, I think this is for both of you, should we be more strategic in our visibility and doing so be more specific in campaigning, lobbying, and even celebrating?
I think I can answer the question a little bit. I mean, I think that visibility is a really slippery slope. I think that the way that we kind of contextually define visibility in 2020 is about, followers and likes and engagement. And I think a lot of that is bullshit. It's really the things that you're doing when you're not visible, the things that you're doing with integrity, the things that you're doing to really impact your community. That's visibility. Like, whether that's making a donation to the Schomburg Center, which I do annually, or volunteering, especially food pantries right now really need help. So that kind of visibility, that's showing up, if that's something that's, within your wheelhouse or your ability to do, I think that is critical. But when it comes to memory and those types of things, I think it really is like sitting with your friends and maybe recording a conversation you have about what's going on. Like, every 5 years, having a call that's just recorded, just to check in. Those types of things I think are really important in terms of seeing and being seen. But I think the conversation around visibility is a really difficult one, especially because earlier we were talking about Laverne, who also was recently attacked. The stakes are very high, especially for Black queer folks, gender nonconforming, the whole fam. So it's a really slippery slope. But I think for me, I try to focus on what I'm doing when no one's looking.
I love that.
What she said. What she said, and it's clear. This notion of visibility is really, I really love what you said, Kimberly, because you ain't got to be visible to everyone. You have work to do. You are responsible not only to your story, you're responsible to other people's story, your parents, your friends, your community. And visibility, I really love what you said about like social media, getting likes and building a following. That's not visibility. That's just something, I'm not for sure what it is, but visibility doesn't mean power. It doesn't mean economic power. It doesn't mean a lot of things. It can sometimes translate to those things, but I think of it more as a platform to build something more significant, to as an addendum, but it's not the thing itself. So you better watch out who you're trying to make yourself visible to, because sometimes you'll be off your track and you need to do your work.
That's right. So we want to play one more clip from the podcast. This one is from Giancarlo Valentine. So we're going to play that, who we love.
We love
The White Gaze, a history captured and documented by someone other. The ways others profit from our pain, and why framing our own images matters. Giancarlo Valentine, photographer, curator, and writer.
The Black Panther Party was imaged by Stephen Shames. He did the entirety of their history. Any image that you have when you look at the Black Panther Party photographs is by a white man. Jonathan Mannion speaks and shames Black photographers in this way of like, it's so white people are so audacious that even though I don't allow myself to be surprised in theory, I'm always surprised by how audacious they managed to be. And Dana Scruggs had shot a cover, and Jonathan Mannion comes out and is like, I did it first, blah, 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 to a Black woman, the first Black woman in history to shoot the cover of Rolling Stone. It was insane. So, this is an ongoing conversation about, one, the only thing that I'm really interested in doing with my photographic work at all is just kind of keeping up a history. If you think about my photos, it's like my dad owned a business, my dad is dead, and now I'm going to keep up this business for him and for the community, let's say. That's kind of how I feel about photography. It's not about reinventing the wheel. I'm not out here trying to be, the most original or the most brand new. That's not what I'm trying to do. I can do other things for that. I'm just really interested in keeping up a particular tradition and righting a historical wrong. And in righting the historical wrong, it should not be the case that every one of our images, every historical moment that you literally can imagine was framed by someone white.
I love that. That was powerful. Super powerful. Well, I want to thank you both for this. I feel like I want another hour with you both because I have so many more questions and am in awe of both of you for the work that you do, because preserving our history and telling our stories in a very thoughtful and intentional way, I think is so important as we do lay the groundwork for a Black future. So in closing, Stephen, would you like to say something?
Who gets to tell your story? Why do they get to tell your story? Be clear about where you put your money. Be clear about where you put your influence. Be clear about who you endorse when they talk about Black people.
I love it. Kimberly?
Period. I I think I'm like contractually and morally obligated to say, please buy my book. And then separately, and especially buy it from a Black-owned bookstore. Please tweet at me if you'd like any recommendations. I have a few regionally based. And then separately, I would say continue to understand that you are not the first to do shit. Like, just be in community with your elders and ancestors. Be in community with those who are younger than you. I think that humility and vulnerability are the most powerful virtues that we have. And so hold them dear and tight and enact them whenever you can.
Word.
I love it. Period. I just want to be like, cut. But but thank you both again. And thank you for the work that you do. And thank you for bringing this conversation to light, because we need to have this, especially now. I want to thank Vive Healthcare. I want to thank Harley and Company, and I want to thank Kimberly Drew and Stephen Fullwood for your contributions, and the Schomburg for letting us have this conversation. Thank you so much. Everyone be safe and download the podcast.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.
And what we live, what we experience, what we document together becomes our archive, our proof of life, and a demonstration of the fullness and the worthiness of our existence. Emil will begin.
So I think archiving is really important. I mean, I am a pack rat Virgo. I keep everything because I want there to be a legacy and evidence of my existence long after I'm gone. I'm not keeping these things because of my ego now. I'm keeping these things because I have intentionally done work to elevate and amplify and change the narratives of my community. And so one of the things that's very important to me with Native Son, and I think it's very obvious when you look at our social media and the fact that Instagram is our biggest platform, the largest community gathers there, because it's an archive. It is an archive that we exist. It is an archive that we are successful. It's an archive that we are able to be loved and in happy, healthy relationships. It's an archive that we can have kids. It's an archive that we are successful in breaking barriers in culture, in politics, in finance, in art. And that I think about our ancestors and how many people we don't know that existed that literally have been erased. They've disappeared. How do we unearth the people that came before us? How are we capturing and celebrating who is doing the work right now and how we exist right now? And then what does it look like in the future?